Preserving Rental Housing Stability in King County, an explanation of the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program, which is a program of the Dispute Resolution Center of King County in collaboration with the Washington State Association of Courts. In this presentation, you will learn how the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program works, both from the tenant's perspective as well as from the landlord's perspective. We'll take a look at the notice for the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program. You'll hear how facilitated negotiations work and about the different options that are available to you. Last but not least, you'll find out how to get started with this program. Before we begin, let's touch briefly on the benefits of negotiating a payment plan rather than arguing the case in court. Whether you are a landlord or a tenant with unpaid rent, you're probably anxious to get that rent paid. Landlords may think that eviction is the best way to cut their losses, and it certainly is one way. However, the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program provides another way that makes it more likely for the landlord to recover the rent that is owed and for the tenant to maintain housing stability. This program provides free access to an impartial facilitator to help negotiate legally binding agreements that eliminate the need to go to court in most cases. First, let's talk about rental assistance. What impact does filing eviction papers in court have on applications for rental assistance? Well, the truth is that if eviction proceedings get started in court, the landlord may not be eligible for most rental assistance programs. And why? Because those federally funded programs are intended to prevent evictions. So getting rental assistance to pay for rental arrears is a good reason for trying to negotiate a settlement instead of going to court. Next, let's talk about the likelihood of tenants following through with a repayment plan. One thing to keep in mind is that negotiating a repayment plan with the help of the Dispute Resolution Center could lead to more satisfying outcomes for both landlord and tenant. Payments that the landlord can rely on because the tenants themselves have agreed that they can afford those payments. And those payments could kick in as early as next month, continuing until rental assistance becomes available to pay off the remaining rental arrears. Last but not least, let's talk about move-out plans for tenants who want to move somewhere that's more affordable. A negotiated settlement could also include a future move-out plan when it's convenient for landlord and tenant. Negotiating that move-out plan as part of a settlement that works well for everyone means that the tenant is likely to leave the unit in better condition and get a better reference for their next landlord. As a result, the landlord spends less on cleaning and repairs, and the unit is ready sooner to rent to a new tenant who can afford the rent going forward. Let's get specific about how the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program works, first from the perspective of the tenant and then from the landlord's point of view. For the tenant, it all starts when the landlord gives them a proposed repayment plan for their unpaid rent. If the tenant does not accept that proposal within 14 days, as a second step, they can expect to get a notice from the landlord about the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program. They can also expect to get a text message and an email from the Dispute Resolution Center, encouraging the tenant to schedule an appointment within the next couple of days. An assigned case manager then follows up with the tenant by phone to find out about their current situation and to explain how we can help. In the third step, the tenant typically works with the case manager to analyze their finances to figure out how much they could reasonably afford to pay each month. Then the tenant responds to the landlord's original offer with their own proposal. The landlord may in turn respond with yet another counterproposal, which the tenant and the case manager could review, taking the tenant's individual circumstances into account. In this scenario, the case manager simply provides coaching so that the tenant can negotiate directly with the landlord themselves, exchanging offers and counteroffers until they reach agreement. If the tenant and the landlord don't reach agreement in this way, they could ask the Dispute Resolution Center to assign an impartial facilitator to help with negotiations as the fourth step in the process. One way that an impartial facilitator could help is by shuttling offers back and forth by telephone between landlord and tenant. If it's a more complicated case, we could facilitate a live negotiation session with mediators to help move things along. We set aside 90 minutes for this facilitated negotiation session, which is currently offered via three-way telephone conference call or Zoom video conference. As a fifth and final step, the tenant and their landlord would both receive a certificate documenting whether they reached agreement or not as a result of their negotiations. And that's basically the way that it works. So far, we've talked about how the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program works from the tenant's perspective. Next, let's look at the program from the landlord's point of view. Here's what the landlord can do to get negotiations started with their tenant so they can both avoid the extra expense and hassle of going through court. The first step is for the landlord to register the tenant for the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program by going to our website and completing an online form. When completing this form, the landlord is required to provide accurate contact details for the tenant and for themselves, and to let us know how they would like us to communicate with them, either directly or through their attorneys. On the form, we ask landlords to provide us with an estimate of how much the tenant currently owes. The landlord automatically gets a confirmation when they submit that online registration form. As a second step, if the tenant has asked for our help negotiating settlement of their unpaid rent, a mediator would reach out to the landlord by phone to help them understand what to expect from a facilitated negotiation session. As a third step, the mediator would confirm with the landlord that they are prepared to negotiate in good faith. At that time, the landlord would be offered the next available opportunity for a facilitated negotiation and asked to make a firm commitment to that date and time. As the fourth step, the negotiations between landlord and tenant would be facilitated by one or two of our professionally credentialed mediators who would document the terms and conditions of any agreement reached. After asking their respective legal advisors to review the agreement, as a fifth and final step, the landlord and tenant would each sign their copies of the agreement, which makes it a legally binding contract between landlord and tenant. If it wasn't possible to reach agreement during the negotiation session, a certificate would later be issued documenting that outcome. After the moratorium ends, a certificate could also be issued if the assigned case manager was not able to reach the tenant within the initial 14-day notice period. The landlord could then take that certificate, along with evidence of their own attempts to resolve the matter, to start eviction proceedings in court. Let's take a closer look at the notice about the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program. Included in that notice are contact details for the tenant, the landlord, and the landlord's attorney. Also included are contact details for local resources, providing assistance with negotiations as well as legal aid and rental assistance. When the tenant gets a notice like this, it's important for them to reach out within 14 days to get negotiations started. The tenant can negotiate a repayment plan directly with the landlord or ask for our help with those negotiations. Incidentally, we encourage both landlords and tenants to ask a legal advisor to review the terms and conditions of any proposed repayment plan before they sign it. Let's take a couple of minutes to review how the Dispute Resolution Center can help facilitate negotiations between landlords and their tenants. There are three options: conflict coaching, conciliation, and mediation, and all of these services are currently free for anyone at risk of eviction in King County. Let's talk about the differences among the available options for negotiations. The first option is conflict coaching, which prepares the tenant to negotiate an agreement directly with the landlord. A case manager assigned to work with that tenant can help them write proposals and respond to counterproposals from the landlords. The second option is conciliation, in which a neutral facilitator shuttles back and forth between landlord and tenant, exchanging offers and counteroffers until agreement is hopefully reached. That facilitator would then document the terms and conditions of the agreement. The third option is mediation. That's a live negotiation session for landlord and tenant, facilitated by one or more of our professionally credentialed mediators. Before scheduling facilitated negotiations, either via conciliation or mediation, both landlord and tenant are required to sign an agreement which protects the confidentiality of what's discussed during those negotiations. So that basically wraps it up. Our hope is that one of these three options, conflict coaching, conciliation, or mediation, will help landlord and tenant to reach agreement so they don't wind up turning such important decisions over to the courts. Decisions that impact not only the stability of the tenant's housing, but also the financial livelihood of the landlord and their continued commitment to providing affordable rental housing in King County. Contact details for rental assistance and legal aid in King County are listed on this slide. If you'd like to schedule a follow-up appointment with a member of our staff at the Dispute Resolution Center, you can email us housing@kcdrc.org. If you are in Bellevue or Kirkland, please reach out to the Bellevue Conflict Resolution Center for assistance with negotiations. Their phone number, 425-452-4091. I hope this presentation has given you an overview of the services that we provide at the Dispute Resolution Center of King County as part of the Eviction Resolution Pilot Program. We look forward to working together with you as we collaborate with Superior Court to preserve the stability of rental housing in King County.